Dan Hurley, UConn coach, in advance of resuming the NCAA tournament tonight against San Diego State in a Sweet 16 game, held a press conference yesterday and was asked about any number of things. And obviously the transfer portal came up. And he said two things that made headlines. One, he doesn't like that it's open right now. And that's not unique to Dan Hurley. I'd say 90% of coaches don't like that it's open right now or that it opens the day after Selection Sunday. But then he added after that he doesn't think it's healthy for students to be able to transfer as often as they, this is his quote, change underwear. What do you make of that quote?
I think that, and see, this is going to sound like old, like, just old dude, not agreeing with how things are going. But I do think that it's, in my opinion, weird that guys are just allowed to transfer every single season if they want to. I think that I kind of like the old method of, you get one, I think, or if you're a grad student, you can go wherever you want. I prefer that. I think that it's not, I don't think it's great for the sport that there's not continuity ever with these big time programs. Like you're going to get to a point, and you already are there, but you're going to get to a point now where you have a new team every single season. And I just think for fans and for the sport of college basketball, I do think it matters a little bit to have guys that you care about that are part of your team for a long time. Like you establish like relationships and fandom. I just think that matters as a college basketball fan.
A lot of people agree with you. I think there's some truth to what you're saying, to what Dan said. I don't know if healthy is the right word, so I'll use a different word. I don't know if it's great. Let's just keep it broad, vague. I don't know if it's great to be transferring colleges every year, like some players are doing now. Just from the sense of, like, you lose credits when you do this. You end up in school longer than you should have been. You end up losing credits that means, in a way that means you just did classes that, the experience, I guess you may have gained something from it, but in terms of pursuing your degree, like, you lose stuff along the way. Like, I agree just on a very basic level, like bouncing from one college to the next isn't great. On the other hand, I would prefer that than any alternative I've heard suggested, because I think any alternative I've heard suggested is just fundamentally unfair. If you want to make these students employees and negotiate contracts with them, I'm all for that. I've been screaming that for like a decade. That's where we'll get eventually, and that's where we should be already. Mm-hmm. But as long as students are just students, then they should be free to move around however they want to move around. And while I do think it's unusual, certainly relative to the way we used to do it, when a player is, say at one school this year and then another school the next year and then another school the next year, because that is happening. I do find it interesting that it happens in coaching too. It just happened in coaching. And I haven't heard anybody say a negative word about it. Not one. Danny Sprinkle was the coach at Montana State 2 years ago. All right? He was the head coach at his alma mater. And then Utah State offered him a job. So he said, well, I'm going to Utah State. Can't turn that down. And he went to Utah State, and he coached this past year at Utah State. And he was so good at that Washington offered him a job. And he said, well, I can't turn down that. So now I'm going to be the head coach at Washington. In less than a year, Danny Sprinkle has coached at 3 different schools. In less than a year. He will have been technically on this, in less than a year, at 3 different places, he will have been the head coach. And nobody thinks that's unhealthy. In fact, you know what people do? They're happy for him. They celebrate him. They say, man, isn't it awesome? This guy's gone from that to this so quickly. But when a basketball player does the exact same thing, we think it's the worst thing in the world. Oh, he's a mercenary. He's just bouncing around. But when it's Danny Sprinkle, it's like, how happy are we for Danny Sprinkle? That's the problem I have with this whole thing, is that if you don't think it's bad or unhealthy for Danny Sprinkle to be moving around, to 3 different jobs inside of a year, then I don't need to hear why you think it's unhealthy or bad for basketball players to do the same thing. And I know it's a little bit apples to oranges in the sense that Danny Sprinkle isn't losing college class credit when he moves from Montana State to Utah State to Washington because he's a coach, not a player, not a student. And I also know Danny Sprinkle doesn't have children. So again, this is a unique situation. But lots of coaches who move around nonstop have children, have families. Is it healthy for their kids to be bouncing around from one elementary school to the next, one community to the next, one city to the next? I think you could probably find a child psychologist somewhere who would tell you that's not the most healthy thing in the world for children to be doing, moving around all the time. But we don't criticize coaches when they move around. We just congratulate them on an awesome opportunity and wish them the best. So that's where I'm at with student athletes too. I understand it's different. It's unusual. It's jarring for some people who just aren't used to watching their favorite players move around so freely and abruptly. But I do think it's the most fair way to do it now. And if you guys want to come up with a different system where we make students employees and sign them to contracts, and the contract actually says, like a coach's contract, if you want to leave us before this contract expires, this is the buyout and this is what it will cost. Let's do that. And then players can pay buyouts to transfer, just like coaches pay buyouts to move schools. But until we're ready to go that far and treat them the same, then let's not hold back the people you're not willing to treat the same.
No, that's a really interesting point too. If you, I'll just a random player, or Kendrick Davis. If you're Memphis and you sign Kendrick, okay, and let's say he had more years available, sign him to. Listen, we want you to come play for us. Here's the deal we got here for you. It doesn't matter how you play. It doesn't matter if you're terrible. We're going to give you this much money for this many years, and you're a part of this thing. And you get to go to all your class, even if you're bad, right? You get to go to all your, and then like you said, maybe there's a buyout situation. If it doesn't work out and you still get all this money, I don't know. I do think that that's an interesting thing that could be explored. But like you said, until they acknowledge that these are, paid semi-professional athletes, I don't think that's ever gonna happen.
We will get there someday, and it's not like we don't have a blueprint for this. What we're watching is professional sports, so just treat it like professional sports. When the Grizzlies draft Zaire Williams and sign him to a contract, it doesn't matter. If Zaire Williams was the MVP of the NBA as a rookie, he would still make the exact same amount of money.
Right.
And if he was the worst player in the NBA, he would still make the exact same amount of money. And he's locked into that contract until that contract expires or the Grizzlies buy him out of it or move the contract. And all of this stuff could be on the table. All of it. I think it'd be a little wild to be traded as a college athlete. You're traded from Syracuse to Southern Miss. I don't think that's ever going to be on the board because that seems nutty.
Right. That seems crazy.
But I do think we should have a system where we sign people to contracts and we're now tied together for the next 2 years. And you can't go and we can't get rid of you unless we want to buy you out or you want to buy yourself out of. This ain't that hard to do. You just got to get there and do it. But it will take them being more equitable, more fair to reach that place. And they don't seem willing. They'll get there eventually, but they're not going to run there. They're going to crawl there and be dragged there. I see Lee in the chat when I was making the point about Danny Sprinkle say that, Sprinkle is a rarity. And he clearly is. That's why I used him as the example, because he's such an extreme example of what we're talking about. So it doesn't happen often with coaches, but that's beside the point. Danny Sprinkle is a rarity, sure, but he's also an example of what's possible if he wants to do it. Any coach could do what Danny Sprinkle did if given the opportunity. There is any coach in America who, if he was coaching today at Austin Peay and then got offered the St. Louis job, he would take the St. Louis job. And then if 1 year later that same coach got offered the Missouri job, he would leave the St. Louis job and take the Missouri job. So Danny Sprinkle is a rarity in the sense that it's not common for people to get the opportunity to move so quickly the way he has. But any coach is allowed to do it if they can. So why shouldn't any player be allowed to do it if he can?
The Gary Parrish Show, live weekdays at 10 a.m.